This Sicha is a Sicha on the Rambam in Hilchos Bias HaMikdash, but it's a Sicha in connection to that which is discussed in the Parsha, how the Yidden, when they saw the fire and they saw the Shechina coming down into the Mishkan, they praised Hashem, etc. So the Rambam in Hilchos Bias HaMikdash says that if a person became Tameh whilst being in the Beis HaMikdash, the halacha is that he needs to rush and quickly leave in the shortest possible path. He's not allowed to delay, he's not allowed to linger, he's not allowed to bow down on the way out, he's not allowed to go out the longer path. He has to take the shortest path. Regarding the shear, the amount of how long is considered lingering and bowing down, the Rambam paskins in a separate halacha, and he says, the kam or shear sheyasei, what's considered delaying or lingering, it's the amount of time that it takes to read the pasuk, a pasuk in Divrei Hayomim. This is after Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash and the fire came down in the Beis HaMikdash. The pasuk says, "Vayichru apayim arta." The people kneeled, they bowed down on the ground, on the ritzpah on the ground. Vayishtachvu, they prostrated themselves. V'hoidos laHashem ki tov ki lo'olam chazdoi, and they proclaimed, "Thanks to Hashem, forever is His kindness." And the Rambam says, "V'zeu shir hishtachavaya." This is the shir, the measurement for hishtachavaya, for bowing down. The Kesef Mishnah says that the source for the Rambam is in Masechta Shavuos, where there it says, "Kamo shir shehiyah," what is considered the shir, the measure for lingering. Pligibo, we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, the Chadeime, along with another Amoira. So one of them says that it's as long as saying the pasuk, and the other one says that it's just from saying from Vayichru till the end of the pasuk, which is the way the Rambam says it. What's the whole pasuk? The Gemara goes through the whole pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'chol b'nei Yisrael royim," all of the Yidden saw, "beredes ha'esh," as the fire came down, "uchvoid Hashem al habayis," and the glory of Hashem was on the house, on the Beis HaMikdash. Vayichru apayim arza, they kneeled to the ground. Al haritzpah, on the floor. Vayishtachavu, they prostrated themselves. V'hoidos laHashem ki tov ki lo'olam chazdoi. The Kesef Mishnah goes on to say that the fact that the Rambam paskins seemingly more stringent, because he's paskening to the shear of bowing down would only be as much as saying part of the pasuk, which means a shorter amount of time, only from Vayichru till the end of the pasuk. And why doesn't the Rambam paskin, according to the more lenient opinion, that it's the amount of time that it takes to say the whole pasuk, which when the Gemara says to say the pasuk, it sounds like it means the whole pasuk from beginning to end. So the Kesef Mishnah answers, V'shemo yeshloimer, perhaps we could say, that when the Gemara says that one of the opinions say that it's the amount of time to say the pasuk, it doesn't actually mean the whole pasuk. It only means the words Vayichru, only those few words that are speaking about the bowing down itself. But it doesn't mean from Vayichru till the end of the pasuk. That's what that opinion meant. And therefore, the opinion that says that it means from Vayichru all the way to the end of the pasuk is automatically a longer shear than the amount of just a few words of Vayichru, speaking just about the bowing itself. And therefore, the Rambam, in fact, is paskening according to the more lenient opinion, which is a bigger part of the pasuk. The Rambam then gives a sort of another explanation. And the Rambam writes that in the Yerushalmi also discusses how long the Ishtachavaya, how long the bowing, the shear of Ishtachavaya is, of bowing down is. Yerushalmi says, Rabbi Simon, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, says that it's just the amount of time that it takes to say the words Vayichru apayim arza al haritzpah vayishtachvu, just that little part of the pasuk that's speaking about the bowing itself. Rabavahu adds that also the words of Ahoides laHashem ki tov ki lo'olam chazdoi. Says the Kesef Mishnah, according to this, we can explain that back in the Bavli, in the Gemara, where it says that there's an opinion that says the amount of time that it takes to say the pasuk, that opinion only meant the part of Vayichru apayim arza vayishtachavu. Didn't mean the whole pasuk actually. So it was just those few words. And therefore, the opinion that says from Vayichru till the end of the pasuk is being more lenient, and therefore, because of the doubt of or how the halach is, the Rambam in fact is paskening to be more lenient. However, says the Rebbe, both of these answers of the Kesef Mishnah need further clarification, as the Mefarshim ask. The first answer that said that when the opinion that says the amount of time that it says to take the pasuk, it only meant the beginning of the pasuk. Well, why would I think to say so? What's the basis of saying that? Seemingly, there's no implication in the Gemara for that at all, that it refers only to one little part of the pasuk, the beginning of the pasuk. And the second answer, that Kemeimer Dai Psuka, means only the words. To say the pasuk means only those words of Vayichru Apayim Arza and Vayishtachavu. So, according to that, says the Rebbe, we need to understand, number one, why then is the Gemara bringing the whole pasuk at all? According to this, there's no opinion that even holds that you need to say the beginning of the pasuk. And by just bringing the whole pasuk, it sounds like the Gemara is sort of blocking out this interpretation of saying that it means only part of the pasuk. Seemingly, it means the whole pasuk. And furthermore, how could you say that in the words Kemeimer Dai Psuka, the amount of time it says to take the pasuk, it would mean only the middle words of the pasuk, not the beginning of the pasuk and not the end of the pasuk? Says the Rebbe, we're going to explain this by first prefacing some other questions in the wording of the Rambam itself. Number one, a diuk in the words of the Rambam. The Rambam says like this: V'kam shir sheyasi, how long is the measure for lingering? The amount of time it takes to say the pasuk Vayichru, etc. And then the Rambam concludes, V'zeu shir ishtachavoya. So he started off how long is the shir of lingering, and he finishes off after saying the pasuk, and this is the shir for bowing down. Why is the Rambam separating these two ideas into two separate things? The shir, the measure for lingering, and then at the end saying, and this is the shir for ishtachavoya, the shir of bowing. Why doesn't he just say it all together, like in the beginning, all together? He just should say, how long is the time of lingering and bowing? The amount of time it takes to read the pasuk. Now, even though it's true that the words of the Rambam are coming over here in continuation in this second halacha, to the words where the Rambam is discussing a situation where if the person, when he was bowing down, didn't actually face the Beis HaMikdash, he was leaving the Beis HaMikdash, he became Tomei, he's leaving the Beis HaMikdash, he didn't turn around to face the Beis HaMikdash, he's bowing down on his way out towards the outside, not facing the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rambam says that he'll only be obligated if Shah Kashir, if he lingered according to a certain amount. And then the Rambam says, so how long is that certain amount? So in other words, that might answer why the Rambam is saying Kamoshir Shiyosei right over here without discussing the Shir Ishtachavoya. But the Rebbe says this itself is not understood. He should have seemingly said right away, he's not chayiv unless he delayed the amount of time it takes to bow. And then he could say, and how long is that? How long is the lingering or how long is the bowing? The amount of time it takes to pasuk. And then that would actually be fitting more with the wording of the Mishnah. The Mishnah actually says, Hishtachava, if one bowed, or Shashah, or he lingered, the amount of time it takes to bow down. Another question. Simply, when we read the Rambam, when the Rambam says, how long is the shir of lingering? Seemingly, it's not only speaking about what he just said in this halacha, the case of when a person was bowing down on his way out and he was facing outside, he didn't turn around to bow down, he's facing outside, and that he's only chayiv only if he lingered a certain amount. Seemingly, when the Rambam says how long is the shir of lingering, it would seem to be that this is on the general idea of one delaying while being in the Beis HaMikdash, which was said in the previous halacha, as we said before, where we said that a person is not allowed to delay, he's not allowed to tarry in the Beis HaMikdash, and if he did, then he's chayiv. So why is the Rambam saying this shir of lingering or bowing only in this halacha, in continuation to the din of if the person didn't turn around to bow, but rather bow down facing outside, then he's only chayiv if he delayed a certain amount of time? Why didn't he say it in continuation to the previous halacha? The actual isur of lingering, he should have right away said a person is not allowed to stay behind for a delayed amount of time. And if he did, then he's chayiv. Immediately there, the Rambam could have said, and how long would it make him chayiv to linger? If he read this pasuk, Why is the Rambam putting it only after this halacha of bowing down, facing out? Says the Rebbe via Shloimer Habir, but so we could explain it in the following way. From the simple reading of the Rambam, where he says, "Va'asur loy lishois," one is not allowed to delay, "Oy le'ishtachavoy," so to prostrate himself, "Oy lotzeis b'derech harukor," to go out a long way, and then the Rambam repeats and says, and if he did delay, or he went out the long way, even if he didn't delay, as long as he went out a long way, even if it wasn't a delay, or if he turned around to the Heichel and he bowed down, even if he didn't delay, then he's immediately chayiv karas. So that's in the previous halacha. It's quite understood, says the Rebbe, that it's not like there's one obligation, one isur, which is that the person is not rushing to go out the shortest way, and then there's three types of scenarios, three types of situations how that could be. One is that he's delaying, he's just taking his time. The other one, if he's bowing down. The other one is that he's going out a longer way. But rather, these are like three separate ideas, three separate isurim, three separate prohibitions, three separate obligations. There are three different gedarim or names. There is one chiyuv, there's one isur, there's one problem with the amount of time that someone is delaying being in the Beis HaMikdash. There's another issue. If a person bows down, even if he didn't delay, just the actual act of bowing down. And finally, there's an obligation for going out the longer way because of the way he went out. Based on these 3 points that we have, 3 different ideas that could be the problem. So now becomes the question. If the person is on the way out, and he bowed down, not by turning around and facing the Beis HaMikdash, he's bowing down on the way out. And we said that the chiyuv is only if he's going to linger a certain amount of time in that bowing down. As a result of which aspect of these above mentioned points is he going to be chayiv? So the Rebbe says this could be learned in 2 different ways, just to mention right now that later on the Rebbe is going to mention a 3rd way. One way of understanding it is, again, we're speaking about the person that bowed on the way out. One way of understanding it is that the prohibition, the chiyuv, what he becomes chayiv in, is only if the ishtachava is, again, if the ishtachava is towards the outside, then it's not going to be considered ishtachava, it's not going to be considered proper bowing down, unless it took a certain amount of time, a certain shear. So that's one way of understanding it. In other words, it is bowing down, but it's only proper bowing down if it's going to take a certain amount of time. Another way of understanding it, that it's nothing to do with the bowing down at all. You don't bow down facing out of the Beis HaMikdash, with your back to the Beis HaMikdash. Rather, the chiyuv over here is becoming just because of the lingering. What's the practical difference between these two? We'll see a little bit later. But the Rebbe first connects it with the Gemara. He's going to say that these 2 ideas can be seen in the Gemara. The Rebbe says, seemingly we could say that this is the difference between the 2 opinions in the Gemara, or 2 versions in the Gemara, of a statement that Rava said. The Mishnah says, we quoted this before, Hishtachava, if the person bows down, or he tarried, he lingered the amount of time that it takes to bow down. On this, the Gemara says, and again, we're going to have now 2 versions of what Rava said. And they're going to sound very similar, and the Rebbe is going to discuss the difference between them. Amar Rava, so Rava said, Loi Shanu, when we say that he bowed down, that he's chayiv only if he bowed down, that's only if he bowed down toward facing the inside of the Beis HaMikdash. But if he faced the outside of the Beis HaMikdash, then if he delayed, then he's going to be chayiv. If he didn't delay, if he didn't linger, then he's not chayiv. The Gemara then continues and says another version of what Rava said. Rava was actually dealing with the second part of what the Mishnah said. Where the Mishnah said if he delayed the amount of time that it takes to bow down. So Rava says that teaches you that bowing down itself seemingly also needs to take a certain amount of time. So it's on this that Rava says, when do we say that the bowing needs to take a certain amount of time? That's if he's bowing towards the outside. But if he's bowing towards the inside, even if it didn't take any time, didn't delay in any way, he's going to be chayiv. So therefore what the Mishnah is saying is that, in summary, according to this, the second, what Rava is saying, and the second one, but we're going to see it's going to be very similar, So the Gemara is saying that the Mishnah means hishtachve if he bowed down towards the inside, or he delayed the amount of time of bowing down. In this time that he bowed down towards the outside, he's going to be chayav. Then the Gemara discusses what is considered the kind of bowing down that's considered lingering, etc., etc. But I said before, seemingly, what is the difference between these two versions of what Rava said? Bottom line is that in both cases, what we're saying is that if he bows down towards the inside, it doesn't need to need a certain amount of time. If he's bowing down towards the outside, it does need to take a certain amount of time. But based on the two approaches that we said before, that when a person is bowing down to the outside, there's two ways of looking at it. Is the chiyuv because of the hishtachava, because of the bowing, but it needs a certain measure? Or is the chiyuv because of the delaying, because of the lingering? So we can now understand the difference between these two versions. According to the first version of what Rava said, where Rava is dealing with the word hishtachava, where the Mishnah said that if he bowed down, he's chayev. And Rava says this only applies if he's bowing down towards the inside. Then that clearly tells you that if he's bowing down to the outside, there is no concept of hishtachava. That's not called bowing down. And that's what he means when he says, aval hishtachava klape chutz, but if he bowed to the outside, if he delayed, then he's chayiv, and if he didn't delay, he's not chayiv. Meaning, because towards the outside, it's only, the chiyuv is only because of delaying. As Rashi says, aval hishtachava klape chutz, that if he's bowing towards the outside, lemizrach, towards the east, ein zu hishtachava, this is not considered bowing at all. And so if he delayed the amount of time it takes, for bowing down, then he's going to be chayiv, says Rashi, because of the shehiyah, because of the lingering. But if not, then he's not chayiv. So that's according to the first way of understanding it. That the whole chiyuv is only going to be because of the lingering, because there is no bowing down to the outside. But according to the second version in Rava, what Rava said, where Rava is dealing with the second part of the Mishnah that says that if the person lingered, the amount of time that it takes to bow down, and Rava says that tells you that bowing down itself needs some sort of measure, then it comes out that even towards the outside, we're still calling it, it's still in the gather, it's still in the realm of ishtachava, of bowing down. Because that's what Rava is saying. Lo shana, we're only speaking about if he bowed towards the outside. Then we say that the ishtachava, that the bowing down needs a certain measure. But towards the inside, even if he didn't linger, then he's chayiv. It's only that towards the outside, it's going to be chayiv. It needs to have a certain measure, a shir of ishtachava. So again, we see clearly that these two ideas in Rava follow these two ways, the way we looked at it, that when he's bowing to the outside, do we say it's considered bowing at all? It just needs a certain amount of time? Or are we saying, no, it's just about lingering? The Rebbe says we could see this in the careful words of Rashi as well. In the Gemara, in the second opinion, in the second version of Rava, where it says that V'hachi ka'amar, that this is what the Mishnah means, that if he bowed towards the inside, or if he lingered the amount of time it takes to bow, during this bowing down towards the outside, he's chayiv. Rashi says, on the words V'hachi ka'amar, and this is what the Mishnah means, that ishtachava klape mipnim, that if he's bowing towards the inside, says Rashi, koldu, even the smallest amount, or if he didn't bow down, and he lingered the amount of time of the chiyuv ishtachava, of these towards the outside, that need a certain shiur of a chiyuv. And the Rebbe says, seemingly, what is this expression? Kadei shiur chiyuv ishtachava. Seemingly, in other words, the measure of the obligation of ishtachava. Seemingly, according to Rashi, what Rashi said in the first version of Rava, the whole concept of ishtachava doesn't even apply. It's only about the lingering. So Rashi should have said, according to the second version, Rashi should have said that we're speaking about it. If he bowed down or if he stayed there, kadei shir shehiyah, the amount of time which is considered lingering. Why is he saying shir ishtachava? And so too in the end of Rashi's words, he should have said that the boy shir shehiyah, you need a shir of delaying, of lingering, not a shir of ishtachava. Says the Rebbe, because it's with Rashi is trying to emphasize that even towards the outside, again in the second version, the chiyuv is because of the ishtachava, because of the bowing down. but the bowing down itself needs to have a shiur chiyuv. It needs to have a certain amount of time of how long you need to be bowing down for. Now, even though it's true that if the person delayed the amount of time of lingering, even if he didn't bow down, he would have been chayav anyways the amount of time of lingering. So then who cares if he bowed down in the middle? Why are we even mentioning bowing down in the middle? The bottom line is he was just there long enough. Says the Rebbe Yeshloimar, again, according to the second opinion, second version of the Gemara, because since we explained that shehiyah, lingering, is considered an isur separate from the isur of ishtachava, so the isur would only be if he was standing in one place while he was lingering. That's called shehiyah. If on the other hand he's doing something, he's bowing down, so then that wouldn't be counted as shehiyah, as lingering. And therefore, the chiyuv wouldn't be because of lingering, rather because of the bowing down. So again, we're up to two ways of looking at what's happening when this person is bowing down on the way out. Is he being chayiv because of the bowing down or because of the lingering? One of the practical differences is, says the Rebbe, we know there's a concept of chatzi shir. Rabbi Yochanan holds, and the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan, that even if someone does chatzi shir, in other words, he doesn't do the full measure of the isur, that's also asur min haTorah. Now, there are opinions that say that it's not only true with food things. If a person ate a half a kazayis of something asur, etc., but even in other isurim, if you did a isur, half a shir is asur min haTorah. So the Rebbe says, but it's known that this isur, this prohibition, could only apply when we're speaking about the measurement of something and it's half the measure. In other words, the act, the essence of the act is the same one. It's just it wasn't done to the fullest degree. So an example for that would be, first of all, with food, as just mentioned. If a person ate a half a zayis of something that is isur, or in an act, if a person took out from a rishus hayachid to a rishus harabim, so he did the whole malacha, but he took out less than the amount that we are told a person would be chayiv for taking out that amount. So that's when we say that even a chatzi shir is asur, although you won't be chayiv, but it's still asur. But what about when the half is not in the measure, but it's in the act itself? If a person did a half a job, a half a malacha, then we wouldn't say that's asur min haTorah. Applying that in our case, this is going to be the nafkamina between the two ways. According to the first way, that the isur, the chiyuv, is because of the lingering. So if it's less than the amount of time what's considered lingering, you can't call it chatzi shir, you can't call it a half a shir. Rather, it's totally not considered lingering. Because lingering, delaying, is not a certain thing that's measured by a certain quantity that's combined from a whole bunch of little parts of time. Rather, this is more a situation, a quality type of thing, which becomes at a certain point, we say this type of situation is now called tarrying, is now called lingering. Less than that is not lingering. So you can't say it's a half a lingering. But if we say that the isur is not because of the lingering, the isur is because of the bowing down itself, and we're saying bowing still needs to have a certain measure, as Rashi puts it, boy, shiur chiyuv, there's still a certain shiur of an obligation. And since the obligation is not because of the state of lingering, the state of lingering, that's only the shiur of chiyuv, within the ishtachava, within the bowing. So therefore, what we would say is, yes, there is possible to be a bowing down, but it's also possible to be that a person bowed down for not long enough, and therefore, it's still a ishtachava, it's still considered bowing, but it's just not considered a full shear to make him obligated. And therefore, if it wasn't for long enough, it would still be asur min haTorah. It's still considered chatzi shir. So again, these were two general approaches. The Rebbe now turns to a third approach. And the Rebbe says we can learn in a third way, that the truth of the matter is that when the person is bowing down to the outside, it's not because of the lingering itself. It is because of the ishtachava. It is because of the bowing down. On the other hand, the lingering while bowing down is not just a shear. It's not just telling you how long the bowing down needs to be towards the outside. But rather, the shehiyah, the lingering itself, is creating it to be a hishtachava. It's creating the name of hishtachava, of bowing down, if you did it for a certain amount of time, when it was speaking about towards the outside. That means, in other words, like this. Towards the outside, on its own, it's not considered hishtachava at all. But when you did it for a certain amount of time, then that bowing towards the outside now becomes hishtachava, and therefore the obligation is because of hishtachava. So again, to summarize, our first way was that the chiyuv would be just because of the lingering itself, nothing to do with the bowing down. He's bowing down the amount of time it took to linger, a certain amount of time. The second way was that the chiyuv is because of bowing down, but the bowing down just needs to take a certain amount of time. There's a certain shear, how long you have to bow down for. The third way of looking at it is that towards the outside there is no bowing down. So when it's less than the shear, it's not considered bowing down at all. It's not just that it's less than the shear. But when it was a certain shear, then it creates the situation that now it's considered ishtachava. Says the Rebbe, v'yeshloimar, this is the shita of the Rambam. And therefore, he's medayik in the halacha. He says, lo hechzer panim, if the person didn't turn around to the Beis HaMikdash, but he bowed down on his way out, towards the outside, he's only chayiv elim kein shaha kashir. He's only chayiv if he delayed a certain amount of time. The Rebbe is soon going to explain all these details, but first just going through the 3 points. What we're going to help understand now. We're also going to understand why the Rambam brings over here the shiur of reading the pasuk Vayichru apay martz al haritzpa vayishtachu v'hoidis l'Hashem kitov k'leilam chazdei in this halacha. Not earlier when he just spoke about the general isur of lingering in the Beis HaMikdash while tamei. And finally, why the Rambam, after this whole thing, then he concludes, V'zeu shir ishtachavoya. The Rebbe explains, if the Rambam would just say simply, Elim kein shah kashir ishtachavoya, if you just say that the person is only chayiv if he delays the amount of time it takes to bow down, without the conclusion, V'zeu shir ishtachavoya, so then we would have understood it in the following way. That towards the outside, it is considered bowing down, but there still needs to be a certain amount of time to make him chayiv. Therefore, the Rambam says, Einoi chayiv elim kein shah kashir. He's not chayiv unless he delayed there for a certain amount of time. But kamoshir shiyase, and how long is the delaying? To read the pasuk, and then he finishes off v'zeu shir ishtachavoy, and this is the shir of bowing down, because the Rambam is trying to emphasize 2 things. That on the one hand, there is no ishtachava, there's no ishtachava towards the outside. But at the same time, if you were there a certain amount of time, bow down for a certain amount of time, that created the ishtachava. And the shear of this delay is in order to read this pasuk, as we'll clarify a little bit more soon. And therefore the Rambam says it in continuation to the halacha where he's speaking about the shear of delaying when he was bowing down towards the outside, not on the previous halacha about the actual delaying without bowing down. Because according to the Rambam, this gather of the shear, this idea of the measurement of bowing down is not just a gather or a chiyuv because of the lingering. Again, it's because of the ishtachava. It's creating a state of ishtachava. So the chiyuv is coming because of the bowing, not because of the lingering. And therefore, if the Rambam would have said the shir in the previous halacha, just when we're speaking about how long it takes to linger, then we would have simply thought that it's nothing to do with creating the geder of ishtachava. That's just a certain shir, how long you need to linger in order for it to be considered lingering. In order to understand all of this, says the Rebbe says, we first need to explain another thing. A seemingly obvious question. Generally, we know that all shiurim are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. As the Rambam says, there could be no halacha. That there could be no machloikas in anything that's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. If that's the case, how is it possible in our case that there should be a machloikas in the shir, in the measure for delaying or for bowing down? So we must say that in our case, the halacha l'Moshe Sinai was just in a general way. That a person needs to linger the amount of time it takes to bow down. But how long is that? How long is the bowing down? That was not said to us in the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And that's why it's possible that there should be a machloikas regarding this. Based on this, says the Rebbe, we could say that the machloikas of the Amoyroim, in how long the shear of bowing down is, and they each quote different parts of the pasuk, is dependent on the three oifanima, these three svaros that we were discussing till now, in the geder of what happens when a person delayed the amount of time it takes to bow down. To explain, says the Rebbe, when we speak about bowing down in the Beis HaMikdash, generally there's three details, there's 3 points. Number one, there's the cause that brought the bowing down. For example, seeing the Shekhinah and the like. Number two, the actual pu'ula, the actual act of the bowing down itself. And number three, what the person is taking his time as he's bowing down, lingering as he's bowing down, that is the time when he's thanking the Hashem, praising Hashem, etc. Says the Rebbe, this is the basis for our machloikas about the shear of bowing down. If we should learn that the shear of bowing down, it's a geder, it's more about something about the lingering, it's a geder in the idea of shehiyah, of lingering. So even when we're speaking about the person bowing down, but it's more about how long he's taking. And as the Gemara says, if shah kedei ishtachava mishchayev mishum shehiyah, sorry, that's Rashi saying that if he bowed down, the amount of time it takes to bow down, that he's chayev because of the delaying, even if practically he's bowing down towards the outside. But why is he being chayev? It's because of the delaying. So then it makes sense to say that the measure, the amount of time for hishtachavaya would be the shear of the whole seder, of everything that it takes from the whole order of hishtachavaya from the beginning till the end, with all the 3 details that we just mentioned. On the other hand, if we learn that the shear of hishtachavaya, it's not about a measure and lingering, but rather it's the geder of hishtachavaya. We're speaking about bowing down itself, which is giving a certain amount of time what it takes to bow down. So then it makes sense that the shear is just the amount of time it takes, the act of bowing down. But if we go to the third svar, which includes 2 ideas, both ideas. On the one hand, there is a proper ishtachavah, but the ishtachavah is being called ishtachavah because of the shehiyah, because of how long it's taking him. So then it makes sense that it's not only the act of bowing down, but also it needs to take the amount of time that the person would take as he's bowing down, meaning plus the time after he bowed down. Says the Rebbe, now we're also going to understand why these Amoyroim are connecting it to a specific part of the pasuk. It's not only to give some sort of sign on how long it takes. We found a pasuk that we could hook it to, connect it to. But rather, it's in the pasuk itself as being hinted the idea of what the machloikas is, of how long the measure of this bowing down is. In other words, since the halacha l'Moshe Sinai says that the shear for lingering is the amount of time it takes to bow down, and it doesn't say clear what that amount is, that time is, so it makes sense to say that somewhere in Torah there's going to be a remes, there's going to be a asmachta, something that we can have as a leaning or a support for what is the shear of bowing down. And therefore, everyone accepts that the remes for the shear of bowing down is in the pasuk with the Torah that's describing the bowing down in the Beis HaMikdash with all of its details. Their machloikas is only which part of the pasuk is hinting to the shear of ishtachavaya, the shear of bowing down. And their machloikas and how we understand the pasuk, which part of the pasuk to focus on, is fitting with the machloikas that we said before in svara of which parts we should include. To explain, in the pasuk there are three parts corresponding to the 3 things we said before. We have the first part of the pasuk where it says all the Yidden saw as the fire of Hashem is coming, down, the glory of Hashem fills the house. This is the reason, the cause that's bringing the bowing down. We then have the middle of the pasuk where they actually bow down on the floor, the act of bowing down, and then we have the end of the pasuk, the idea of thanking Hashem and kiloi lom chazdoi. In other words, the point, the goal of the ishtachavah. Says that, but now we can understand the different opinions. If we should say that the shear of bowing down is more about a geder of shehiyah, of lingering, how long one needs to linger there, and the shear ishtachavah, the measure of bowing down, as we said, is like the shear of the whole order of bowing down, all of its details. So everything that leads to the Ishtachava, the bowing down itself, and the results. So then it makes sense to say that the shear of the Ishtachava is hinted in the reading of the whole pasuk, where it describes the whole order of Ishtachava. So it includes the beginning of the pasuk, the cause that brought to the bowing down, and which that is the whole point of lingering in the Beis HaMikdash, and that includes the whole Seder. The cause, in other words, what they see with the fire coming down, they see the Shekhinah, the bowing down, and the praise and thanks that it had brought to. On the other hand, if we learn that the shear of bowing down is not a shear of lingering, but rather that's just telling us the Geder of Ishtachava, so then it makes sense to say that the reading of the pasuk that's connected with this is only that part that's describing the act of bowing down itself. But then according to the third opinion, which we said before, that would fit with the Rambam. We have both ideas together. The Ishtachava, the bowing down, is created because of how long it's taking him. Then it makes sense to say that it's not enough just to read the part of the pasuk that's speaking about the act of bowing down, but also the continuation, the ending of the pasuk, which brings out the whole idea, the toich and the content of what the bowing down is for, to thank Hashem forever is His kindness. In other words, in that is expressed that there is a certain content, something that takes some time during the Ishtachava, during the bowing down. The Rebbe says, based on this, we can also understand the difference between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. In the Bavli, the Gemara brought the opinion of saying the whole pasuk, whereas in the Yerushalmi, all of the opinions there are only dealing with the end of the pasuk, from Vayichru onwards. So again, going back to the Bavli. In the Bavli it says, V'kam Shir Shehiyah. The Rebbe is going to explain based on this why the Bavli has the whole pasuk included as well. Since the Bavli asked, how long is the shear of lingering? Which is emphasizing that the shear is something to do, not so much with the actual din of bowing down, but it's more to do with the lingering, with the shehiyah. Whereas in the Yerushalmi, the emphasis was, where it says, Kam shear ishtachavoya, how long is the shear of bowing? In other words, it's a gather of bowing. And therefore, in the Bavli, you also had the whole pasuk, the beginning of the pasuk. Whereas in the Yerushalmi, we were speaking just about the act of bowing down itself. So you only have the opinions that are discussing the part of the pasuk that is dealing really from the bowing down itself, or also the content, the idea, the result of the bowing down, but not the beginning of the pasuk, which would be more to do just if the geder was about lingering. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we can now go back to why the Rambam brings the part of the pasuk that he does. The fact that the Rambam paskins that the shear of Shehiyah is to read Vayichru apayim arza ala ritzpa Vayishtachvu v'hoydis la'Hashem ki tov k'lelam chazve, and he says v'zeu shear ishtachavaya, is not only because of how we said before from the Kesef Mishnah that he's trying to say the more lenient opinion, but rather according to the Rambam that is the geder to explain this idea of what the lingering and ishtachava are all about. That is both things together. That the lingering itself creates this situation of the ishtachava, and therefore we have both the ishtachava plus the lingering along with it afterwards. The Rebbe now turns to explain these opinions al derech hamusar v'achsidus. Says the Rebbe, ishtachava, the idea of bowing down, its idea is absolute bittul, that a yid is completely being mevatel himself to the Eibishter. And in this there are three levels. There's the ultimate perfect ishtachava, and this would come by a yid when, as a result of his hisboinenus and his mind and his thought and the greatness of Hashem, and to the extent that this brings him to a situation of re'iyah, he's like seeing godliness. Like in the pasuk, royim beredes ha'esh, they see the fire coming down in the glory of Hashem. And this causes that he should have a hishtachava, this prostrating of spreading out his hands and feet. He's completely bottled to Hashem, not only in an external way, just with his actions, but his whole stature, every part of him, starting from his pleasure, his rotzain, his will in the head, all the way down to his actions. On the other hand, there is also a level where he doesn't feel gili elikos, he doesn't have this idea of seeing godliness, and nevertheless he bows down. He forces himself to bow down. He forces himself to give himself over to the Eibishter, at least in action. So far the Rebbe spoke about two extremes. We're soon going to get to the third one. Generally, by Am Yisrael, this is like the difference between the time of the Beis HaMikdash as Managolus, and the time of the Beis HaMikdash, Alikus was in a revealed way. They saw godliness, and they came both to see godliness, to be seen. So this Re'iyah brought that the fact that they saw godliness made that the ishtachava, the bowing down, was really in a very internal level. He was completely bottled. He doesn't have any of his own metzias, any of his own existence. So that's on the one extreme. On the other end, in Zman HaGolus, I say, where we don't see godliness in such an open way. Or as we say in Musaf, Einon Yucholim Lalois V'lirois. Einon Yucholim Lalois V'lirois. Uli Ishtachavois L'fanecha. We cannot come up and we don't see godliness and bow down in front of Hashem. In other words, because we don't see godliness, that's why the Ishtachava, yeah. So we don't have the seeing of godliness, so therefore the Ishtachava is not b'shleimus, so it's only b'chitzonius. In other words, he has other desires, he has other thoughts, but he's forcing himself. He subdues his guf not to rebel against Hashem, but deep down inside he's not bottled. So here we have the two extremes. Says the Rebbe, of both of these levels of bittul, or both of these levels of ishtachava, which would be represented either by the whole pasuk, meaning all the way from the seeing of godliness, or only the act of bowing down itself, which would represent the lowest level, are both not the regular seder that needs to be by every single yid in all times. The first extreme, since it's connected with this lingering, in other words, seeing elikus, this is a very, very high level. Not in all times, elikus is revealed. Not every single person can lift himself up to see the glory of Hashem. On the other hand, the other extreme, just bowing down, is a very lowly level. A yid always has to work on himself to lift himself up higher than that. That his bowing down shouldn't only be an act of bowing, only forcing his guf not to rebel, but it should also be with inner feelings, getting his heart involved as well. Says the Rebbe, this is the third way of bowing down. That yes, in the beginning of Avodah, he's forcing himself, but from that itself, from the bowing, he now moves on to the next stage of thanking Hashem. In other words, coming to an appreciation and a feeling of the nefesh, where he is submitting himself and giving himself over to Hashem. And this type of ishtachava is shaykh to every single yid. Because even though not every yid is able to manage to get through his boiners, create through his contemplation, a bittul on the deepest level of his nefesh, but naturally every yid has a bittul to Hashem because of his neshama. And it's in the power of every yid to reveal that, to awaken that. And through the actual fact that yid forces himself and gives himself over to Hashem, ultimately that itself reveals the inner bittul that he has because of his nature. And therefore the Rambam paskins lahalacha, because Torah generally speaks, alarayv, what's applicable for the majority of Yidden. Says the Rambam, Kam shir sheyasi, what's the shir of lingering? To read Vayichru apay martza al ritzpa vayishtachavu, which is the bowing down itself. V'hoides la'Hashem kitev kileilam chazle, and then he says zeu shir ishtachavoya. He says that this ishtachava, this bowing down, along with at least some lingering, this every yid is shaykh to. In other words, not only the act of bowing down itself, but also thanking Hashem and submitting himself to Hashem in his nefesh. And this fits very much with the Rambam, the well-known Rambam, that paskins, that even a yid, that Beis Din needs to force him, perhaps sometimes even in a goyish court, that even if a goyish court is forcing him to do the mitzvahs of the Torah, deep down inside he wants to do all the mitzvahs. He wants to stay away from Averos. And that's the true desire of every single yid. And therefore, even when he's being forced, and in an open way, we hear him screaming. In other words, when we force him, he now says, Roitzani, I want to do the right thing because he's being forced. But the truth is, he's not saying it only because he's being forced by the whip. In other words, that's what it seems like. He's just doing the act, the bowing. But the Rambam says, on the contrary, that's not being considered being coerced to do that. On the contrary, it's the Yetzer Hara that was getting the better of him before. And now when he's being hit, and the Yetzer Hara is being weakened, and he's saying, yes, I want to do the right thing, that means now he did the mitzvah, in whichever case that particular mitzvah is, that I'm speaking in the dinim of Gerushin, so it's considered that he did it willingly. In other words, we're saying that ishtachava is in truth because of his inner nefesh. And therefore, this is demanded by every single yid, that within that external ishtachava, although that's only b'maisa b'poil, but within that itself, it should be ma'oyer, he should reveal that yoimar, that saying of that bittul that was there hidden inside of his nefesh, And through this act that we try to be poil on every single Yid, of course in pleasant ways and in peaceful ways, they should weaken his Yetzer Hara. For actually forcing someone that you would need a whole Beis Din. But we could just influence Yidden. And we reveal the emesa pnimius, the karotzon of every single Yid that comes out begili, that really he wants to do all the mitzvahs and stay away from the Averis. That hastens and brings closer the Binyan Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi, when all Yidden will be Oila Regel, and will be the Leroys, or the Yishtacha, V'Yislufanecha, B'Shleimus Kedeboy, in Bebeis B'Chirasecha, as we say in Muslim, the house that you have chosen in the Beis Hamikdash, B'Meheira V'Yameinu Mamash.